Death is one of the only things in life that puts everything else into perspective. Your death could be today, tomorrow, or 80 years from now. Life being finite is what makes it special. That's why you have to value each and every day, try to appreciate the small things in life, and maybe sometimes stop to smell the flowers. Hold your loved ones close, because none of us really know when it's going to end. With that in mind, my name's Ryan from Tragedy Tales. Grab a drink, dim the lights, and sit back. Without further ado, here are 10 more bizarre deaths. This tragic yet bizarre death begins in the Emerald City of Seattle, more specifically the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Now on August the 10th, 2018, around 2:36 p.m, a 29-year-old man named Richard Russell, also known as Bebo, clocked in for his shift at Seattle Airport. Richard worked at the airport as an air ground service agent for the last 4 years. He and his team were responsible for the luggage and the actual towing of the planes on the runway. While he was known to be quiet, he was very well liked by his peers. On that fateful day, something snapped in Richard's mind. After clocking in, Richard could be seen on CCTV going through the staff security gate, wearing a t-shirt reading "The sky's no limit." He then grabs his rucksack and continues on through. He then heads towards the toilets, where he spends the next 5 hours doing who knows what. 5 hours later, Richard emerges from the toilet and immediately heads towards plane cargo 1 at the north end of the airport. Around 7:15, Richard can then be seen on CCTV arriving at plane cargo 1. Here he begins hitching a Bombardier Q400, a turboprop commercial aircraft that seated 76 people, up to his tow buggy. Then, all captured on CCTV, you can see Richard towing the plane all by himself towards the runway. Once it's in position, Richard leapt out of his buggy and ran towards the still rolling plane. He quickly flung open the door and hopped inside. And just like that, the plane began to roll down the runway. As he did this, air traffic control began to sense that something wasn't quite right. They requested that the pilot read out their call sign multiple times, but they got no response. It was all silent until Richard contacted air control, saying,
"Seattle ground, Horizon guy, about to take off, it's gonna be crazy."
Soon after this communication, with zero flight experience under his belt, Richard just took off. Upon witnessing a plane being hijacked, the emergency bell was raised. Seattle Airport allowed no other planes to leave, and 2 F-15 Eagle fighters scrambled to intercept the aircraft. Both were armed with 2 air-to-air missiles.
There's an emergency situation going on, and FAA Tower's not accepting any aircraft right now, not letting anybody depart.
Tower, you need to call and scramble now.
Air traffic control immediately demanded that he landed the plane. Richard replied that he wanted to do a few tricks before landing.
I just kind of want to do a couple maneuvers, see what it can do before I put her down, you know?
As he began to gain altitude, he could be seen from the ground performing various tricks, loop-de-loops, spinning and contorting the plane as if he was playing Grand Theft Auto. He was flying completely upside down at one point, causing him to be violently sick in the cabin.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Sorry, my mic came off, I threw up a little bit.
Air traffic control contacted the plane again, but not all is what it seemed. Richard told them that he was a broken guy, got a few screws loose, I guess. I never really knew until now. He went into some detail about pay, but it sounded like Richard was just completely sick of the everyday routine. Those on the ground asked him if he needed help, and Richard responded,
"You seem comfortable with that?"
"Oh, hell yeah, it's a blast, man. I played video games before, so I know what I'm doing a little bit."
The 2 F-15s attempted to direct the aircraft towards the Pacific Ocean and did not fire at it. They tried and tried to convince him to crash the plane into the ocean. Still, the plane continued soaring as Richard headed towards a sparsely populated island called Ketron Island, located 25 miles southwest of the airport. Towards the end, the aircraft was seen performing an epic barrel roll, recovering a mere 10 feet or 3 meters over the water. A veteran pilot said the maneuvers seemed pretty well executed without either stalling or pulling the wings off. Around 1 hour and 15 minutes after takeoff, at 8:43 local time, Richard could be heard getting emotional, saying that he's running low on fuel. He then apologised to his friends and family before slamming the plane into Ketron Island. The impact completely obliterated the aircraft, causing it to explode in a plume of smoke and flames, killing Richard instantly. The fire burnt up to the evening of the next day. A review of his text messages sent during the incident, so like actually while he was piloting the plane, did not indicate that he had any terrorist ideology. However, investigators did receive information regarding his background that pointed to high stress levels and a rough personal life. But there was no clear element that provided a motivation for his actions. This situation may not have happened if Richard had just reached out for help. As tragic as his death was, he could have dealt a lot more damage if he decided he wanted to. Richard's manager said that the aerial maneuvers were incredible, and that he did not know how he achieved the experience that he did, concluding that Richard probably trained himself using amateur flight simulation software. Russell's family released a statement on August the 11th, stating they were stunned and heartbroken, and devastated by the events that unfolded. While researching this, I found Richard's personal blog. If you're interested, I'll link that in the description below, as I do with all references. On February the 14th, 2022, as dark settled on Mangaluru, an Arabian seaport located in India, a 17-year-old woman named Survaya was preparing for bed, going through her nightly routine. Survaya was a pre-university student at Pertha College. She was a native of the Mangaluru and described as a kind, caring, and very thoughtful person. Survaya's next job in her routine was to brush her teeth. In the darkness of the night, she stumbled into the bathroom, applied what she thought was toothpaste, and began brushing her teeth. As she brushed, she got the instant taste of a funny chemical. She knew this was not toothpaste. She turned on the light and looked at her toothbrush. It was completely black. Survaya glanced at the sink to see 2 tubes, her regular toothpaste and rat poison, Ratol. Instantly realizing what she had just done, she spat the poison into the sink and rinsed her mouth profusely. That night, she felt okay, and as she was scared to tell her parents what had happened, she went to sleep and hoped that it would be fine. The following day, she woke up and she was fine. However, as she ran through her morning routine, she developed a banging headache. Soon her gums went bright red and started seeping blood. It started with a few drops, but it soon became uncontrollable and began filling her mouth with blood. She was rushed to the nearby hospital where they desperately tried to save her, but sadly her condition did not improve. She began convulsing and went into cardiac arrest right in front of the doctors. Tragically, she died soon after arriving in A&E. When her body was tested, the doctors discovered a vast amount of rat poison in her system. While she did not swallow any of it, just brushing alone was enough for it to seep through her gums and her tongue and ultimately kill her. Her death was labelled as a misadventure, which goes out as a lesson to all. Do not keep rat poison near the toothpaste. In early 2008, a 51-year-old Catholic priest by the name of Father Adelaide Antonio began to think of ideas to raise money to build more rest stops for truckers in his country. He first considered a sponsored skydive, a marathon perhaps, and he thought, well, what do truckers do? They sit down for a long period of time, so he finally settled on the most ridiculous of ideas. He decided that he would break the flight time record using helium party balloons, which at the time was 19 hours. While Father Adelaide was a very experienced skydiver, this would be a totally different kettle of fish. His first attempt was on January the 13th, 2008. He gathered 600 helium balloons, tied them to his chair, and successfully completed a 4-hour flight from Brazil to Argentina, over a total distance of 16 miles. It was just him, his harness-like seat, and his balloons. With just this, he soared to heights of over 17,000 feet. This all led up to Sunday, April the 20th, 2008. Adelaide felt he was ready. He met with film teams in the southern port of Paranagua, where here he attached 1,000 helium balloons of various colours to his specially made buoyant chair. He was wearing a parachute and a thermal suit and carried only his satellite phone, GPS device, water, cereal bars, and a couple of energy capsules. After checking that everything was in order, he cut the cord that was attaching his chair to the ground and waved goodbye to everyone. As he slowly drifted into the air, he felt amazing. He just kept going up and up. It was noted that he was freezing, but absolutely fine. He reportedly reached an altitude of 20,000 feet before descending to around 8,000 feet for his final stretch of the flight. When he descended to this altitude, all of a sudden, the winds switched directions. Adelaide was blown violently off course. He could have parachuted to safety while over land, but chose not to. The wind blew him miles. He soon found himself hopelessly gliding over the Atlantic Ocean, several miles off the coast. As Adelaide began to lose altitude over the open sea, he contacted emergency services. They asked him for his coordinates from his GPS device, and this is when the situation turned from bad to worse. He got it out of his bag and realised that he couldn't work the device. Due to this, they couldn't pinpoint exactly where he was, despite having 1,000 bright balloons above him. Before losing contact, he said he was losing height and was forced to land in the sea. It's assumed at this point that the balloons began to pop. He continued struggling with his GPS before it lost its battery and died. He now found himself on a chair in open water with little supplies. He believed that God would guide him through these troubled waters. After they lost contact with him, planes and helicopters were dispatched from the Brazilian Air Force, and even ships from the Brazilian Navy were redirected to look for him off the coast. They scoured the waters, and there was nothing. However, over the next few weeks, bits of balloons began appearing on mountains and beaches, all but confirming the priest's fate. They later found the upper half of his torso floating in the water. Father Adelaide just wanted to raise money for a good cause, but more money was likely spent in his rescue than was raised. Not to mention, the plan was doomed to fail from the start. The balloons used by the priests were described as party balloons, which are more thin and delicate compared to the weather balloons used in similar stunts. These balloons were not made for such high altitudes, and that, paired with the inability to read the GPS, led to his tragic demise. On October the 20th, 2017, a 36-year-old woman named Natalia Nemetz began her shift cleaning at a confectionery factory in Russia. That day was like any other. Natalia and her two colleagues began their shift cleaning the machinery. And this is when it got to cleaning the mixer bowl, used for caramel. This bowl was significant enough to submerge your body in. As Natalia cleaned the rim of the tank, for an unknown reason, boiling hot caramel began pouring into the bowl. Natalia did not stand a chance. When she did not arrive at her post later in the morning, her colleagues realised something was wrong. When they went to look for her, they found only her legs sticking out of the caramel. She did not cry, and apparently no noise was heard whatsoever. Sadly, there is little info on this story, but my first questions would be, why was the caramel released in the first place? Did someone do this on purpose? Was this a mistake? If so, why were they not held accountable? Rio de Janeiro is one of the most visited cities in the Southern Hemisphere. Located in Brazil, it's known for its natural settings, carnival samba, beautiful beaches. It's also known for its poor quality healthcare. Sadly, nobody knew this better than an 88-year-old woman named Hilda Vitor Maciel. On the 27th of September, 2021, Hilda was rushed to hospital for a suspected stroke. When she arrived at the hospital, they injected her with a drug, and this worked wonders. The stroke passed, and they were in the clear for now. The next day, on the 28th, Hilda began her road to recovery. As she began to have problems eating, Ilda had a feeding tube installed through her nose. Later that day, Ilda's daughter had come to visit her. It was now lunchtime. A nurse entered the room, attached to what she thought was the feeding line, and began injecting her lunch into her stomach. It just so happened to be chicken soup. She set the feed going and went off into the next room. Within seconds of her leaving, Ilda's face changed and contorted. Her face turned to absolute horror. Her daughter, who was in the room, said she had never seen her mother that physically distraught. Ilda started to squirm uncomfortably and stick her tongue out. She then began to scratch and hit herself. Something was not right. Her daughter ran out of the room, screaming for help, and nurses rushed in. When they got into the room, they immediately knew what had happened. The soup was being injected into her veins, not her stomach. The nurse had made a fatally poor blunder and mistook the feeding tube for an intravenous catheter in her right hand. Doctors tried everything to save her, but it was now far too late. 12 hours later, Ilda died. Later that week, the hospital publicly admitted to the mistake, but then added that they did not admit it was related to Ilda's death. An autopsy later contradicted this, however, proving her death was in fact a pulmonary embolism, which is essentially where your veins are obstructed. She had chicken soup in her heart and lungs. Upon this confirmation, her family were utterly outraged, as I would be as well. They demanded answers and justice. Ilda's family later filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the hospital, stating that they did not want this to happen to anyone else. But sadly, with most of these court cases that are usually solved sort of out of pocket, out of court, I was sadly unable to find the result. The ancient city of Tarragona, located 71 miles southwest of Barcelona, is usually a quiet and serene place to live. This all changed, however, in January of 2020. As night settled, it was looking to be a smooth night in. At around 6:40 local time, the people of Tarragona prepared for dinner. Out of the blue, a subtle rumbling noise could be heard in the distance. This noise soon turned to a deafening roar. The building shook, glass rattled, and a massive explosion could be heard in the distance. Thousands of people rushed to look out their windows to see a fireball light up the night sky. Huge plumes of smoke and fire could be seen coming from a chemical plant in the southern industrial zone. The chemical plant was being used to produce ethylene oxide, a highly flammable gas. Officials urged everyone to stay in their homes, which is precisely what led to the death of a man named Sergio. Unfortunately, we have no photos of him. He was sitting in his apartment around 2 miles away from the blast when a 1-ton piece of metal came ricocheting through the air, smashing through everything it came into contact with. It collided with his building and went straight through the brickwork into the flat above him. This caused part of the ceiling to collapse, and Sergio was in the wrong place at the wrong time. As he was sat watching TV, the ceiling and the piece of metal came crashing down on him, killing him instantly. The blast must have been immense to blow a 1-ton piece of metal 2 miles, and the chances of him being where he was at the exact time, it's frankly bizarre. Other pieces of metal were found strewn across the city. Officials said that the explosion was caused by a 20-ton tank full of ethylene oxide. The only people to die was 1 factory worker and Sergio, leaving another 8 injured. A spokesperson for the company said that they deeply regret the loss of one of their co-workers and the suffering of those who are injured. And after digging through the net, I can't find any public record of an apology to Sergio, nor could I find that they issued any compensation either. This tragic death comes from Zabinka, Belarus. On August the 31st, 2019, it was no ordinary day. It was in fact Yulia Sharko's 21st birthday. Yulia and her husband lived with their 2 daughters, 4-year-old Margarita and 2-year-old Ariana, in Zabinka. On that fateful day, Yulia was with her family visiting a friend's house for a lovely birthday meal. When they arrived, Yulia's husband had some bags and some supplies, so he and his 4-year-old daughter Margarita got out of the car and went into the house first, leaving Yulia to get Ariana out of the car. While her husband was busy chatting to friends inside, Yulia leaned into the car through an open window to get her daughter. As she did this, Ariana leant on the window controls. With zero time to react, the window quickly ascended and shut on Yulia's neck. With the 2-year-old completely unable to understand what was happening, the window continued jamming on her neck, cutting off her air supply. She must have struggled and banged on the window. It's just a truly horrifying situation to find yourself in. Just 10 minutes later, her husband went out the house to find her lifeless, still trapped in the window. He immediately released her, but by then, her skin was blue. She was taken to hospital where they tried to stabilize her, but she'd been without oxygen for too long. Of all the days for this to happen, it had to happen on her 21st. Sadly, Yulia never regained consciousness. MRI scans showed that the window had clamped on her aorta, cutting off the vital oxygen supply to the brain, causing catastrophic brain damage. Tragically, 8 days later, it was decided that she was brain dead and allowed to die naturally. Now this is just a tragedy. The horror of your entire life shattering within the space of just 10 minutes, it doesn't bear thinking about. And if you ever think about leaning into a car window for whatever reason, maybe think twice. This tragedy begins in India. On December the 16th, 2015, a family man of an unknown age named Ravi started his shift at Mumbai airport. Ravi's job at the airport was in the towing department. Very similar to Richard, he assisted in getting the planes where they needed to be. His shift was going well until it came to around 8:40 p.m. Ravi and his team made their way to Bay 28, where Hyderabad Flight 619 had just landed after operating another flight from Jaipur. They were running on a very tight schedule and were actually 1 hour late. So as soon as they landed, they refueled and hurried to take off again. Just a little bit of context, an aircraft parked in a bay cannot reverse on its own and must be pulled by a tow vehicle. Ravi and his 3 other colleagues hitched the plane up to the tow car, and Ravi, being the most senior member of the towing department, stood by directing the whole maneuver. As Ravi stood dangerously close to the whirling engine, all of a sudden, the plane lurched backwards. The blades pulled him straight in. The suction power of jet engines is quite hard to comprehend. Some plane engines have 50,000 horsepower and can vacuum out a 4-bedroom flat in half a second. As you can imagine, Ravi died instantly. Nothing was left of his extremities. When the police arrived, they only found a gnawed torso strewn beneath the plane, covered in blood. Passengers that were on the plane at the time glanced out the window to see a red haze. His body was so badly mutilated that it could not be sent for a post-mortem examination. Not like it was needed. He was brought to a hospital in 2 carrier bags. His family had to confirm it was him by looking at a CGI reconstruction of his face. An investigation began to figure out what exactly happened. They discovered that the pilots had mistaken a thumbs-up signal for the release of the parking brake. The minute they released that brake, the plane lurched backwards, sucking him in. Due to being in such a rush, they had also broken various rules with takeoff. Members of staff who should have been present were not, and the aircraft's auxiliary power unit, the APU, needed to be fixed. The pilots were immediately sacked from their jobs, and the airline offered a compensation of £5,000 to the deceased family, and weirdly, even offered his sons and brothers jobs in the airport. A year later, the 2 pilots were charged and arrested for causing his death due to negligence. In November of 2019, a 49-year-old man named Vladimir went shopping for a day in Leda, Russia, with his all-time best friend, 53-year-old Igor. Vladimir was an avid angler who served in Russia's army tank unit. He had an adult daughter and 2 younger children aged 9 and 7. As Vladimir was driving through a car park with his friend, thinking about what he would do when he got home, within a blink of an eye, the car fell straight into the ground, smashing the windscreen on impact. They'd been swallowed by a flash sinkhole. However, they quickly discovered this was no ordinary sinkhole. When they landed, 75-degree hot water was spraying everywhere. In Russia, hot water is piped to work and residential buildings for heating during severe winters. Inside the hole was a broken hot water pipe. If you're unaware, steam burns hurt way more than regular burns. Because steam contains more energy than water at the same temperature, when that steam lands on your skin, it turns back into boiling water, transferring that excess energy to you. This is known as the latent heat of vaporization. Not to mention, steam can affect your entire body at the same time, burning from top to bottom, a truly excruciating way to go. CCTV captured moments after the ordeal. You can see the car in the ground engulfed by steam. The two men desperately tried to escape the car, but it was impossible. Their fates were now sealed. Another car drove over the same spot just minutes before the accident. That driver, however, noticed the ground beginning to steam and quickly drove off. Unfortunately, these two men were not so lucky. The water company, T+, promised to pay compensation to the dead and meet the cost of their funerals. Now this one genuinely gave me nightmares. I woke up in a cold sweat, hoping that this never, ever happens to me. In 2015, deep in the heart of Houston, Texas, lived a 61-year-old woman named Mary Cerruti. Pictured here, Mary lived alone with her cats. She hung tapestries on the window to maintain her privacy and was the kind of person that just kept to herself. She lived a very secluded life, and her closest relatives were cousins who lived across state. So she just lived day by day, pottering on. She didn't really receive phone calls, nor did anyone really check up on her. In summer of 2015, her neighbours started to become concerned after they noticed the mail began to pile up in front of her house. They also noticed a front window broken, yet it was not repaired for weeks. Finally, on the 5th of May 2015, Mary was reported missing by her friends after she stopped returning calls. The police rocked up to her house and investigated. They found her car still in the drive, but Mary was nowhere to be seen. They searched the house, but there was nothing. No evidence, no leads, poof. Mary had just disappeared. Her bank accounts had not been used and the house was left untouched. A year later, still nothing. Her house became overgrown, trees and bushes began covering the front porch, all while her car rotted in the driveway. As the bank did not receive mortgage payments, 2 years later, the house was formally repossessed. The bank cleared up the property, cut away the bushes, and put it up for rent. And within days, a young couple had moved in, and it seemed like the perfect home. Until this 911 call was received.
I didn't know exactly how to do it, but I just moved into this house. I'm renting it. Just moved in a couple days ago, and I found between two of the walls, I found a human skeleton.
The new homeowners found a rat-infested skeleton jammed in a 15 to 20 inch space behind the bathroom wall. The police told the homeowner to remain where he was and not disturb the scene. When authorities arrived, it was clear to see that the remains had been there for a long time. So long, in fact, her cause of death could not be determined. Along with the gnawed bones laid tattered clothing, rotten shoes, and last but not least, her glasses. This exact pair she could be seen wearing in this 2013 footage at a community event.
Hi, my name is Mary Cerruti, and I live at 610 Alston.
After extensive, and I mean extensive DNA testing, the bones were finally confirmed to be Mary's. She had been trapped between these two walls for 2 years. When they went up to check the attic, they found a broken floorboard right above where she fell. They deduced that she must have entered the attic and slipped through the wall, and just like that, the house became her tomb. By looking at the photos, the drop doesn't look that significant, so it's likely she survived the fall only to find herself well and truly stuck. The tiny space was so small that she wouldn't have been able to even move an inch forward or back. Trapped between these two walls, it was like a sound chamber. Here she was stuck for who knows how long, until she likely succumbed to dehydration. Absolutely horrifying. Hundreds, if not thousands of people walked past this house, not knowing she was inside. The bank even cleared up and sold the house and didn't notice. This whole ordeal makes me want to scream. The thought of being trapped in a space where you physically can't move an inch forward or back, screaming endlessly, knowing nobody is going to hear you, knowing that you may never be discovered. it has to be one of the worst deaths imaginable. My initial questions are, if she entered the attic, surely she must have left the ladder down. Was this not a good enough hint? Perhaps the police closed it, or who knows? Mary's remains were finally removed from the house in 2017, and I hope that she is at peace now. May all the victims of this video rest in peace. But that is the end of the video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments below. I say this in every video, but I do read every single one. And just before I go, if you're into true horror content, and if you look down there and you're not subscribed, go and tap that subscribe button now. But I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.